I'm glad to be joined in Shanghai, Wu Changhua, China Director of the Office of Jeremy Rifkin, and also in Islamabad, Muhammad Irfan Khan, Professor and Founder of the Department of Environmental Science with International Islamic University. Welcome to both of you. We see increasing discussion about important topics related to the common ground, climate change, and also biodiversity. Now, Ms. Wu, you have been following China's development for decades in this regard. What do you see as the biggest, shall I say, the common ground China could have given the latest changes in geopolitics and trade with others in discussing way forward?
Thank you for having me on the program again. And I think the common grounds or the interconnectivity of climate change, biodiversity, as well as land degradation or desertification are pretty much, they're connected with each other. So on one side, of course, we have to really address those issues sort of on different fronts, but at the core of the solutions, somehow they are connected to one way or another. I think that's the core common ground the global community is more and more concentrated on and trying to figure out what will be the constructive, productive solution so that countries, businesses, financial institutions, and people can take action to address those root causes. In many, many ways, there are co-benefits in that process, but in the meantime, there are trade-offs that we need to figure out how to balance that as well. Now, put the urgently needed global clean energy transition, particularly in terms of mitigating climate change, and we are now stuck in the geopolitical rivalry or security debate, which is really, really unfortunate. I think all the data started to show on one side, it's very promising to see China's contribution in terms of really help accelerating the urgently needed global clean energy transition. But in the meantime, we started to realize actually the trade conflicts, the new barriers actually put together by developed countries in terms of, against China's competitiveness has dramatically slowed the progress, which is really unfortunate. So in order to getting back to address the root causes, to find solutions to fight climate change, to combat desertification, as well as, protect, conserve biodiversity, we do need to work together collectively and put aside the geopolitical rivalry and really trying to find solutions, enhance the common ground in terms of finding solutions to build a sustainable future.
Right. Professor Khan, of course, 1.2 billion people in the world, they are very dependent on some of the things that our earlier speaker have just mentioned, biodiversity, climate, as well as our ways of dealing with desertification. Now, from your perspective, how to link these important factors together so that the world can be more concerted in our efforts?
In fact, technically and scientifically speaking, the biodiversity and climate change, they are intrinsically linked. Wherever there is a change in the climate, there is a change in the habitat. And the biodiversity we deal at three levels. Level one we call alpha, which is the genetic diversity among the living organisms at the gene level. And second is the species level. And third is the habitat level. So it is the interaction of the genotype, the genes with the habitat or the environment that produces the species. So if there is a change in the habitat, that will ultimately affect the genotype, and the species will be changed, maybe extinct, maybe new species emerge. So in that way, they are intrinsically linked in a scientific way. Secondly, what she has been talking about, the geopolitical situation, apart from that, any change in our hydrological cycle that may lead toward desertification, it means they're going to change the habitat of the organisms. Or if in the process of desertification, many species will be vanished and they will move to some other habitat. Right. And to go to other habitat, due to under new interaction, they might have certain mutations and genetic changes and some new substances they may emerge. So they are intrinsically linked. We cannot separate them.
Following the Kunming-Montreal meeting last year, there is one Biodiversity Fund jointly established by the government of China and also the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, they recently announced that even though it didn't get much coverage, even though the amount of financing is to start with, but this certainly means implementation of what is in the document. So tell us more about where China is at this point, not just being the host of the last conference, but rather be able to progress on both the biodiversity front at home and also be a positive contributor to the international efforts.
Sure. And I think to start with, China's presidency of COP15 launched a $200 million fund called the Kunming Biodiversity Fund as a starting point. On one side, to demonstrate China's dedication, commitment, as well as leadership as the world's largest developing country, to really work, dedicating to supporting other developing countries to work together to address the root causes of barriers, actually, that's sort of damaging to the biodiversity. But in the meantime, put that in the bigger context there, we all know in order to address global biodiversity challenge, we need to mobilize as much financial resources as possible. And we do need to create finance vehicles like the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, and we need more. We need more others to chip in, as well as maybe other funds actually to put together. But in the meantime, to mobilize more financial resources, input, maybe from broader community philanthropy there as well. Now, coming down to the national level, China has been making its steady efforts to protect biodiversity, as well as really delivering the commitments laid out in the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But in the meantime, China, has been and will continue to be joining global forces to call more support, collaborative efforts in order to address global barriers, global hurdles, in order to advance global biodiversity agenda. Because at the end of the day, the planet is a system. We call the Earth system. Right. And we need somehow humanity coming together to address that.
There is a debate about what is the best approach. Right now, China has cooperation with the global south, quote unquote, mainly developing and emerging economies, and a lot of the programs are being done bilaterally. There's also discussion about whether it is better bilaterally or whether it's better multilaterally through different kinds of platforms. So how do you see this debate, and where is China now?
Well, I think we need all of them. At the end of the day, we do need to define the common ground, the key indicators. We have to make sure all the efforts, collaborations, partnerships actually will be able to deliver commonly shared goals, targets, so that we really deliver the global biodiversity, targets agenda there.
The issue of climate change will be very much discussed in the upcoming Baku conference. Particularly design the road ahead for reaching the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. How much do you see is the possibility there, given the geopolitics and also the fragmentations reflected already on the issue of EVs and many other things?
You see this again, like we have the traditional fuel before this energy transition that was restricted to certain countries, and they have developed their oil economies. Now for these EVs and the batteries and other area, there are some other elements like nickel and cobalt. The reserves, they're going to play a role in the geopolitical situation where they have reserve, because one thing is the generation of the alternate energy, other is the storage. And the storage used to have the lithium, and we used to have nickel and cobalt with the long-term storage. So nickel, cobalt, main reserve, mainly in Afghanistan, some other area in the Central Asia. So they're going to play another role now in the coming age. So the geopolitics, because it is a transition phase now, we are moving from fossil fuel to the non-fossil fuel area. And in the non-fossil fuel, there are multiple kinds of alternative sources of energy. Solar, then we have hydro, then we have wind, and then EV vehicles and storage devices. So there are multiple businesses that are involved in this. So that will definitely play setting the role, considering not the purely climate or the environment of that area. Again, the businesses will play the role. And the business interests, the vested interests from who is behind those governments who are going to play the lobbying of the what you call the energy sector tycoons. They will definitely play a role. So in that case, the politics will play the major role in Baku.
Chinese Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang is in Europe, likely to discuss with his European counterpart on climate change and also biodiversity, environmental issues. We all know in China, there's a tremendous amount of energy being put on these topics. If you ask people on the street, they will also tell you what is happening around their life in terms of these different development. So, Ms. Wu, how much do you think, given the current circumstances, can high-level interactions like this be able to pave the way for reducing the geopolitical, at least the misunderstanding, while at the same time build common consensus for a global issue like what we've been talking about?
You see, the rhetorics is always play a role in such kind of meetings. But this is, I think, that era, and we have come out of this the traditional war and the Cold War and the other area. It's an era of environmental diplomacy, the climate diplomacy, the hydro diplomacy, the energy diplomacy. So instead of going competition and fighting on these resources, because traditionally we have been studying that there would be a time when the people will fight on water. I think it's not only the water, people will fight on energy and the food. So the climate change, in fact, has become a non-traditional security threat to environmental security in terms of water security, food security, energy security. So when these are the things, then we have to expand our horizon of foreign policy agenda to include these issues in our foreign policy. We have to expand our horizon of security agenda. We have to include these security issues into our national security issues along with the traditional structural security. That is, again, an important role. But I think we cannot ignore these issues which are under a non-traditional security threat with the climate change. So I think meeting with the ministers, visiting to the EU, I think this is the time right now that China has taken a good initiative going to the Europe, because again, the industrial powers, most of them in the European Union. So I think most of the corporate sector and the China's an emerging economy, rapidly emerging economy, they have to come on a point of negotiation so they can have like a consensus building prior to going to Baku or other area. So that's kind of a, I think, the pre-conference meeting.
Wu Changhua, Muhammad Khan, thank you so much for both of you joining us. Appreciate it.